The engines went silent at 30,000 feet. 155 passengers heard the terrible quiet and knew they were going to die. The captain searched desperately for anywhere to land. No runway was close enough. Only a freezing river below offered hope. But water landings almost always end in tragedy. Among the terrified passengers sat a woman in farmer's clothes. Nobody knew she possessed the one skill that could save them all. Nobody suspected the quiet rural worker held their survival in her hidden expertise. Before you watch full story, comment below, from which country are you watching? Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The Airbus A320 cruised at 32,000 feet through crystal and morning sky. Its twin CFM56 engines humming their steady industrial song while Captain Marcus Webb reviewed the descent. Profile into LaGuardia with the methodical precision that 23 years of commercial aviation had ingrained into his professional routine. The coffee in his insulated cup still steamed beside the throttle quadrant, untouched. Since departure, as he confirmed vectors with New York approach control through his headset, Flight 1549 carried 155 souls through air, so clear and cold that Manhattan's towers stood visible 70 miles ahead, sharp against the winter horizon like promises of safe arrival that seemed absolutely routine on this January morning. His first officer, Jennifer Park, updated the flight management computer while cabin service began its final preparation for arrival. Flight attendants moving through the aisles with practiced efficiency that suggested nothing but ordinary completion of another northbound morning departure from Charlotte Douglas International Airport. The Canada geese appeared without warning at 11,000 feet. During their initial descent into the New York terminal area, a massive flock rising from the Hudson Valley wetlands in their winter migration pattern, their formation dense and chaotic. As they climbed directly into the aircraft's flight path with the inevitability of collision that neither technology nor pilot skill could prevent, the aircraft's weather radar showed nothing because birds don't reflect radar energy the way storm cells do, and the traffic collision avoidance system remained silent because geese don't transmit transponder signals. Webb saw them for perhaps 2 seconds before impact, a dark cloud of perhaps 50 large birds rising directly ahead with wings beating frantically as they climbed through the exact altitude corridor the aircraft occupied. His hand moved instinctively toward the throttles in futile defensive gesture as dozens of large birds struck the aircraft's nose, windscreen, wing leading edges, and both engines simultaneously with sounds like sequential explosions that echoed through the cockpit and reverberated through the entire fuselage structure. The left engine ingested at least 4 large geese through its intake cowling, their bodies weighing perhaps 12 pounds each and shredding instantly into the spinning compressor blades with catastrophic results that destroyed the precise tolerances, allowing jet engines to function. The titanium and nickel alloy blades, spinning at over 10,000 revolutions per minute, disintegrated upon contact with organic matter traveling at relative velocities exceeding mph. Compressor stages separated from their mounts. Turbine sections fractured under imbalanced loads, and the entire engine core essentially destroyed itself within seconds as metal fragments ricocheted through chambers designed for smooth airflow rather than solid projectiles. The right engine suffered identical devastation 1 second later, both power plants experiencing immediate flame out as organic matter converted sophisticated turbofans into dead weight hanging beneath the wings, their combined thrust of 48,000 pounds. Instantly reduced to zero with no possibility of recovery or restart. Webb felt the aircraft shudder through the control column as both engines went silent simultaneously, their familiar vibration disappearing instantly and leaving only the whistle of wind across the fuselage and the sudden terrible quiet that every pilot dreads. The loss of engine noise created an eerie silence in the cockpit that felt almost supernatural. After hours of constant turbine hum, the absence of that sound triggered primal fear in both pilots who understood immediately that silence meant catastrophe. The cockpit filled with warning tones and automated alerts creating cacophony of alarms, master caution lights illuminating red across the instrument panel, while the engine indicating and crew alerting system displayed the catastrophic reality in technical language that translated to simple truth. They were going to crash. The primary flight display showed both engine indicators dropping to zero thrust, the ECAM system cycling through emergency procedures, and multiple warning messages competing for attention on screens designed to help pilots manage emergencies. But now simply confirming their worst nightmare: engine failure. Both engines, Park announced with professional precision that barely masked the terror in her voice, her hands already moving through the dual engine failure checklist that every commercial pilot practices in simulators, but prays never to execute, with actual passengers depending on their skills for survival. The checklist procedures felt inadequate in the face of total thrust loss. Relight attempts, fuel system checks, electrical system management, all designed for single-engine failures or situations where at least some thrust remained available. Webb attempted restart procedures with mechanical precision, even as his mind calculated what both pilots already understood with sickening clarity. They were flying a 70-ton glider descending at approximately 1,000 feet per minute with perhaps 3 minutes before impact became inevitable and absolutely no thrust available to change their trajectory or extend their range toward any airport. "We're not restarting," Webb said after 30 seconds of futile ignition attempts. His voice steady, despite the sweat breaking across his forehead and the adrenaline flooding his system. Both engines showed complete failure with no response to restart procedures, no indication of any internal combustion resuming, no possibility of thrust recovery through any emergency protocol their training provided. They were descending over the most densely populated metropolitan area in North America with both engines dead and 155 people facing certain death unless Webb could find somewhere to put this powerless aircraft down in approximately 3 minutes before altitude ran out completely, and physics claimed them with finality that no skill could overcome. Park calculated distances to available airports with desperate speed, her fingers flying across the flight management computer. Teterboro Airport lay within visual range, but required altitude they no longer possessed given their descent rate. LaGuardia was mathematically impossible. Newark completely unreachable, given their current glide ratio and the inexorable reality of gravity pulling them toward Earth. "We can't make any runway," she announced with the finality of mathematical certainty that allowed no hope. "We have maybe 2 minutes before we're too low for any option." Webb scanned the landscape below with predator intensity, his eyes moving systematically across the suburban sprawl of northern New Jersey, where apartment buildings, schools, shopping centers, residential neighborhoods, and industrial complexes created a deadly obstacle field where any landing attempt would kill everyone aboard the aircraft, plus countless people on the ground in their homes and businesses. His military training from fighter operations decades earlier kicked in with cold assessment of impossible options. No clear space large enough for emergency landing. No open fields within gliding range. No golf courses or parks sufficiently sized. Nothing but buildings and obstacles in populated areas, where their descent would create mass casualties and transform aviation emergency into ground disaster. Then he saw the Hudson River running north to south like a silver ribbon through the urban landscape, its winter waters wide and relatively clear of boat traffic on this cold January morning, offering the only possible landing surface within their remaining glide distance. "We're ditching in the Hudson," he announced to Park with decision that allowed no second guessing or debate. "Begin water landing checklist immediately." The announcement to the cabin came with brutal honesty that commercial aviation rarely employs with passengers who expect reassurance rather than terrifying truth. "This is the captain. Brace for impact. Brace for impact. We're going into the river." The words triggered immediate chaos among passengers who understood with terrible clarity that their routine morning flight had just become a survival scenario that most commercial water landings historically resolved through drowning and fuselage breakup. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with urgent commands delivered in voices that remained professionally controlled despite their own terror, their training overriding their awareness that they were preparing passengers for one of aviation's most dangerous emergency procedures. They demonstrated crash positions with mechanical precision, checked seatbelts with hands that wanted to shake, prepared emergency equipment with minds calculating survival odds, and maintained professional composure while knowing that successful commercial water landings had occurred so rarely in aviation history that each attempt risked catastrophic structural failure on impact. Children began crying with instinctive fear as parents held them close. Businessmen who'd been working on laptops moments earlier now gripped armrests with white knuckles. Elderly passengers whispered prayers in various languages while younger travelers frantically typed final messages to loved ones on phones they knew wouldn't transmit. A mother in row 12 held her infant daughter against her chest, tears streaming down her face as she whispered apologies for bringing her child on this flight. Two businessmen in first class who'd been arguing about a contract before the emergency now held hands in silent terror, their previous conflicts meaningless in the face of imminent death. A young couple in row 20 who'd been traveling to New York for their honeymoon embraced each other tightly, the husband whispering, "I love you," repeatedly while his bride sobbed against his shoulder. An elderly man, in row 15, pulled out a photograph of his grandchildren, staring at their faces with expression of profound grief at the realization he might never see them again. The cabin filled with sounds of terror barely contained, sobbing, praying, desperate declarations of love into phone recordings, strangled cries of fear that people tried unsuccessfully to suppress, and the mechanical repetition of flight attendants commanding, "Brace, brace, heads down, stay down," with voices that cracked slightly despite their professional training to remain calm during emergencies that would kill them along with their passengers if the ditching failed. Sarah Chen sat in seat 18F, maintaining the same quiet composure she'd shown throughout the flight. Her weathered hands folded across the simple canvas work jacket that identified her as rural working class, her face showing the deep lines of outdoor labor and sun exposure, and her belongings consisting of a worn duffel bag that suggested agricultural work rather than any professional occupation requiring business attire. Other passengers had barely noticed her during boarding at Charlotte, their eyes sliding past her farmer appearance toward business travelers in suits and tourists in designer clothes, who seemed more interesting or worthy of attention. The flight attendant had provided her with standard emergency instructions delivered with slightly louder volume and simpler words as though rural background suggested limited comprehension or education, never imagining that this woman in work boots and faded jeans possessed technical expertise directly relevant to their desperate situation. Sarah's actual background remained completely invisible beneath her deliberate farmer disguise, hidden by conscious choice after military retirement 5 years earlier. She'd spent 12 years as a United States Navy seaplane pilot conducting maritime patrol, operations and tactical recovery, missions from coastal waters where emergency water landings represented regular training rather than theoretical possibility taught once in her naval career had begun at Pensacola, with flight training where she'd excelled in water operations that other pilots found challenging, leading to her specialty assignment in P-3 Orion, maritime patrol aircraft, and later transition to S-3 Viking carrier-based anti-submarine warfare platforms. Her military specialty had been tactical recovery operations requiring aircraft to land on rivers, coastal inlets, narrow channels, and challenging water surfaces under combat conditions, where perfect technique meant survival and any error meant death for her crew. During deployments to the Persian Gulf and Western Pacific, she'd conducted missions that sometimes required emergency landings in hostile waters when mechanical failures or battle damage left her no choice but to ditch rather than attempt reaching distant airfields. She'd executed 17 emergency water landings during her naval career across various hostile environments. 3 in rivers, similar to the Hudson, 7 in coastal waters with challenging currents, 4 in open ocean during storms, and 3 during night operations with minimal visibility. She had pioneered ditching procedures specifically designed for narrow water corridors rather than open ocean procedures that she documented in classified training manuals after near-death experiences taught her what conventional wisdom got wrong about water landings in confined spaces. Her expertise with powerless water landings exceeded what commercial aviation ever taught because her military operations had required mastering exactly this impossible scenario under conditions far more challenging than civilian emergencies. When she heard Webb's announcement about ditching in the Hudson, Sarah's experienced ear caught the subtle changes in engine noise, or rather, the absence of it, and recognized through the aircraft's descent angle and the attitude. She could feel through her body that the captain was following standard commercial ocean ditching procedures. She understood with absolute clarity, born from actual experience, that his conventional approach would prove catastrophic for narrow river landing. The descent rate felt wrong to her trained senses. Too steep, too fast, optimized for scenarios that didn't match their reality. She could feel through the aircraft's attitude that Webb was setting up for approximately 7 nose down approach. Could sense from the deceleration pattern that he was maintaining higher airspeed than optimal for river conditions. Could recognize from years of water landing experience that every aspect of his approach was textbook. Correct for ocean, but dangerously wrong for confined waterway. Commercial water landing training assumed vast ocean surfaces with unlimited width and relatively predictable swells. Assumed approach angles optimized for open water without concern for lateral boundaries or current effects. Assumed impact dynamics completely different from confined river corridors with banks and bridge obstacles and current dynamics that fundamentally changed everything about proper ditching. Technique. Webb was flying by the book, following procedures that would cause fuselage breakup when the aircraft hit river. Water at approach angle, designed for ocean rather than narrow waterway with current running south at several knots and with structures creating obstacles that ocean landings never faced. Sarah had seen similar approaches during her military career result in catastrophic failures. Aircraft breaking apart on impact, fuselages buckling at pressure bulkheads, wings separating from airframes because pilots applied ocean techniques to river conditions without understanding the critical differences in hydrodynamics and impact forces. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, running mental calculations based on their current altitude, descent rate, and the Hudson River's characteristics she knew from previous flights over this area. The aircraft would hit the water in approximately 90 seconds at their current profile. Webb's approach angle looked to be about 7 nose down. Appropriate for ocean ditching where you had unlimited lateral space and wanted to minimize the chance of cartwheeling, but far too steep for a narrow river corridor where excessive descent rate would cause the tail to strike first with force that would buckle the pressure bulkhead and break the fuselage apart. She calculated quickly in her mind that 7, with their current weight and configuration impact forces, would exceed the fuselage structural limits by approximately 40% concentrated. At the aft pressure bulkhead, where the toilet, compartments and galley created natural weak points in the airframe, the aircraft would fold like aluminum foil. At that stress concentration point, water would flood the cabin instantly through the rupture, and passengers in the rear sections would drown within seconds, while those forward might survive only to face hypothermia in January water temperatures. The captain had probably never executed an actual water landing in his entire career, had certainly never landed on a river, and was implementing procedures designed by people who'd never done it either, but had created protocols based on theoretical modeling and ocean assumptions that didn't account for current dynamics, lateral boundaries, or the completely different hydrodynamic forces involved in confined waterway impacts. Sarah stood up during final descent with decision born from watching 155 people about to die from well-intentioned, but inadequate, conventional procedure that would kill them just as surely as doing nothing. She moved forward through the aisle with steady purpose while passengers around her screamed for her to sit down, while nearby, travelers grabbed at her jacket trying to pull her back to crash position, while flight attendants rushed toward her with urgent commands to return to her seat immediately. "I'm a former Navy pilot," she announced with calm authority that cut through the chaos like a blade. "I've landed aircraft on rivers multiple times during military operations. Your current approach angle will break the fuselage on impact. I can help you if you let me into the cockpit." The senior flight attendant, a woman named Patricia Morrison with 20 years of experience, hesitated for only a moment as she processed Sarah's words and recognized something in the passenger's voice, some quality of absolute certainty and technical precision that suggested genuine expertise rather than passenger panic or delusional heroism. Morrison made the split-second decision to bring Sarah forward to the cockpit despite every protocol and regulation forbidding passenger access during emergency operations. Despite her awareness that she was violating fundamental security procedures because something in this rural woman's bearing suggested she actually knew what she was talking about. Webb turned in his seat as Sarah entered the cockpit with Morrison behind her, his initial resistance to passenger interference visible in his expression and his hand moving toward the crash axe in defensive instinct, until Sarah spoke with technical precision that proved immediate credibility. "Captain, you're approaching at approximately 7 nose down at 140 knots indicated airspeed. That's textbook correct for ocean ditching according to commercial training protocols. But you're landing on a narrow river corridor approximately 3,000 feet wide with current running south at roughly 4 knots. Your descent angle is too steep for confined water. You'll hit hard, and the fuselage will buckle at the pressure bulkhead aft of the wings. The aircraft will break in half. You need to flatten your approach to 3 maximum. Reduce airspeed to 125 knots using maximum pitch control without stalling, and account for current direction that will push you downstream during touchdown and affect your impact angle. I've done this 17 times in P-3 Orions and S-3 Vikings during tactical Zeppelin operations. Let me help you." The specific technical knowledge convinced Webb instantly. This woman knew river ditching procedures that commercial training never covered, understood water current dynamics and their effects on impact forces that he'd never considered in 23 years of airline flying, possessed practical expertise with landing powerless aircraft on narrow waterways that exceeded anything his conventional background provided. He made the desperate calculation, in perhaps 2 seconds, that someone with actual river landing experience represented their only realistic hope for survival, against mathematical odds that heavily favored catastrophic failure. "Tell me exactly what to do," Webb said with decision that abandoned protocol and ego for practical necessity. Park stared at both of them with expression mixing terror and desperate hope, as this rural farmer in work boots became their emergency flight instructor at 1,500 feet and descending rapidly. "Reduce your descent rate now," Sarah commanded with authority earned through actual experience rather than theoretical training, her voice steady and clear. "Pull back gently on the yoke. Use the aircraft's remaining kinetic energy to